Politics and the media. It is the role of the media to expose Americans to government, question the actions and motivations of politicians, and explain to us what is it that they are doing. It's just like it is the media's responsibility to question why Bush went to war with Iraq, or why the Treasury Department bailed out the banks that were too big to fail, or it is the media's job to wonder why and ask the tough questions to the President Obama's administration. Why did you work so hard to get the Affordable Health Care Act passed, but then drop the ball on the implementation of the healthcare exchange website? That is what media does for us. Setting the agenda is an important part of that. This is the media working as that role of gatekeeper, deciding what stories to let through and what stories will not be reported on. Okay, so why does the media decide in the past week to go over Hurricane Haiyan night after night, or healthcare, or NSA surveillance? Why are these issues considered important? And because the media decides that these issues are important and continues to cover them, the effect is we think these issues are important. We begin to discuss these issues, and we want our politicians to now handle these issues. And that's where how a bill becomes a law process starts, is because the media tells us what the problems are in America. We react to those problems. That reaction's measured through public opinion, and then that starts the ball rolling for getting legislation passed that addresses our concerns. And that's all thanks to the media doing their job as setting the agenda. Now, the president and the media, the president, when it comes to media, is the most covered. He is easier for the media to keep track of what he's doing because he's one guy. And there are 535 Congress members. There's 9 Supreme Court justices, which wouldn't be too hard to keep up with, but they're not high-profile people. I mean, you could be standing at a sandwich shop in Washington, D.C. right next to a Supreme Court justice, and you probably wouldn't know. I would know, that's for sure. I would probably pass out, be starstruck, but you wouldn't know. So the media doesn't bother covering them because they're not going to get them any, major hits on the internet or anything like that. So Supreme Court's not covered, but the president is. Okay, the president is, and because he's most covered, he is the most effective at using the national media to gain support from the public. And our president is getting even more high-tech because now he does weekly YouTube addresses to discuss his policy agenda, kind of like FDR did fireside chats. So the president is the #1 focus of the media. Therefore, the president is able to use the media more effectively than the other 3 branches. Now, what the president is doing less of is press conferences. And press conferences are when the president directly addresses the public. Now, that's where you'll see the president. So here's an example of a press conference. The president is standing at a podium. He is asking reporters, calling on reporters. Reporters are asking him questions, and he's answering them. So he's doing that a lot less because it's very difficult for the president to control a press conference. He can't really predict all the time which reporters are going to ask which questions, and it's really difficult for him and his staff to prepare statements for those questions if they're not quite sure which questions are going to be asked. So the president doesn't want to look like a chump or doesn't want to say something that might be taken as a soundbite and then used against him later, so he avoids press conferences. What he is doing more of, and this isn't just Obama, this is the office of the president, is more media events. So press conferences have been replaced by a staged event where a political leader that wants media attention or wants to draw attention to themselves can set up a scenario and invite the press to that one particular situation. Then the president can say, look, I'm not taking questions, but I'm going to make a speech. I'm going to be here in a factory in Ohio, and I'm going to talk about job creation. So if you want to ask, a couple of reporters may ask me a question about job creation, but I'm not going to take any questions on anything else. All right, so that allows him to control the situation a lot more. This is an example of a media event right here. You see Biden, who traveled extensively to Iraq and Afghanistan. He would travel with reporters and he would tell reporters, I am open for any questions about our strategy in Afghanistan and Iraq. Ads, the president uses ads, and I'm not talking about campaign ads, but I'm talking about he can run his own issue advocacy ads if it's paid for by him. So if he wants to run, if Obama wanted to run an ad right now informing people about the benefits of the Affordable Health Care Act, he could do so. Actually, I'm really surprised he hasn't, but he's just been using media events to try to bump up support for the Affordable Health Care Act. Okay, Congress uses C-SPAN. C-SPAN is a channel that's almost totally dedicated just to covering congressional events. C-SPAN was established in 1979, and that's what they do. They cover voting on the floor of both the House and the Senate. They'll have a lot of Congress members. If you remember in Hardball, Newt Gingrich would know that the C-SPAN cameras were filming a particular speech of his, and he always looked really important, but even if there was nobody in the House, he would still stand there at the podium and make a speech because all C-SPAN focused in on was your face, and you could never tell that there weren't people in the audience. But anyway, Congress doesn't get as much media attention because there's so many of them. There are a few Congress people that you will hear about in the news again and again, and that tends to be your leadership, like John Boehner, Speaker of the House, or Eric Cantor, Minority Whip, or Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader, or Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, or Nancy Pelosi, Minority Leader of the House. So you'll hear those people's names, but for the most part, unless you're a high-profile congressperson, you're not even going to get any recognition. The Supreme Court, the most uncovered branch of government, which is ridiculous because that's the reason they're allowed to do and get away with half the stuff they get away with. Now, I love the Supreme Court, but nobody pays attention to what they do unless there's a landmark case, and most of the time there's not landmark cases. Oyez is the Supreme Court media. That's like Oyez, court is now in session. They record all of the happenings of the Supreme Court. After the end of the Supreme Court session, Oyez publishes those oral arguments. They publish the decisions of the Supreme Court. Trust me, you will get to be best friends with Oyez next semester, and it'll be fun. I love the Supreme Court. Okay, investigative journalism. And investigative journalism is like that muckraking. It's detective-like reporting to unearth scandals, scams, schemes. Now, the effect of investigative journalism is that you have reporters in adversarial relationships with political leaders. And you know that to be true because there was an entire chapter in Hardball about how you need to be aware of the media. Media is not your friend. Okay, so the media, as investigative reporting has become more commonplace, you see more politicians scared of it. Now, the important investigative journalism moment that you need to know when, and I'll adjust that, when investigative journalism blew up the scene was with Watergate. And there were two guys who uncovered the Watergate scandal. It was Woodward and Bernstein. Now, Woodward and Bernstein were actually given a leak. Somebody leaked information to them from inside the White House. And they were told, they later named this guy Deep Throat, okay? And they named him Deep Throat because he, he had a lot to say. But Woodward and Bernstein was told by Deep Throat to follow the money. If they followed the money that Nixon was spending in his campaign, that money would lead to the people that Nixon hired to break into the Watergate Hotel. That's exactly what Woodward and Bernstein did. They followed the money. They found out that Nixon was tied to Watergate. They broke the story, which later ended in Nixon's resignation. So that is really the moment that we look back at and we say this is when modern day investigative journalism blew the scene up. Of course, there was muckraking during the Progressive era, but things kind of waned from the 1920s till the 1970s. So it was like a 5 decades or 50 years of politicians not really getting a lot of heat from the media. And that's why you were allowed, like JFK could get away with having an affair with a lot of women, or FDR could get away with having polio and not being seen in a wheelchair, is because the media with politicians kind of had this understanding that they had a private life and there was something personal and the media would focus on politics. But with Woodward and Bernstein discovering the corruption surrounding Watergate, all of that changed. The Freedom of Information Act also kind of added to that. The 1966, the act was passed and allows citizens and the media to inspect all government records, except for classified military or intelligence documents that, if leaked, would hurt national security. You can't see trade secrets or private personnel files, but like all of that, all of this stuff that the NSA just released yesterday saying this is what we're doing. We did look at y'all's emails. We looked at your emails up into 2011 when we realized the system was ineffective. We stopped doing it. But that they had to release that information under the Freedom of Information Act. That's what we call a piece of sunshine legislation. Sunshine legislation is any piece of legislation that makes the system more open, fair, clear. Like if you were to put a piece of paper and hold it up to the sun, you could see through it. Or if you took something out of the darkness and put it in the sun, you could see what was going on. And that's what the Freedom of Information Act allowed. It's a piece of sunshine legislation that makes the system more open and fair and clear. And if we take the time, we can discover what the government is doing. We just never take the time.